He worked very hard to erase you and me.
There's a name that used to be everywhere. On the radio, on the charts, in the same conversations as the biggest women in R&B. And then one day it wasn't. No goodbye, no explanation, no final album, just gone. Like someone reached into the timeline and quietly removed her. And the strange part isn't that she disappeared. The strange part is how little anyone asked why.
I really like him though. And I don't care who he's dating. I always had a crush on him though.
Blu Cantrell. Say that name to someone who was alive in 2001 and watch their face. They remember the song. They remember the voice. They remember thinking she was going to be massive. And then they'll pause, because they can't quite remember what happened next. That pause is the story. That gap in the memory is exactly what someone needed to exist. Because the deeper you go into why Blu Cantrell vanished, the more a different question starts taking shape.
Have you ever kissed Jay-Z romantically?
No. No, I can't answer that.
One that has nothing to do with album sales or label politics. One that connects her disappearance to a relationship that was never supposed to be public, a pregnancy that was never supposed to be confirmed, and a child born years later with a name that may have been the only.
Netflix only released 4 episodes, that's all. But behind the curtain, the production team was sitting on something much bigger, an entire mountain of unseen footage that never made it out. This wasn't throwaway material. This was heavy, reputation-shaking content strong enough to stand on its own without executives deciding what viewers were allowed to watch. Everything couldn't make it, 50 explained on Sherry's show. It was only 4 episodes, so it was a lot. You had to pick and choose things. Just like that, he confirmed what fans suspected all along. The cutting room floor wasn't scraps, it was treasure. Then Instagram lit up. A fan posted guessing there was hidden footage, and 50 himself jumped in to confirm it. His reply, correct 100 to 40 hours of footage, not there was, but there is. Present tense. Loud and clear, meaning all of it still exists. And if anyone has it secured, it's him.
And most people paying attention have left.
Blu, it's time to talk. It's time for you to sing again.
And at the center of it all, Jay-Z, Beyonce, and a silence from Blu Cantrell.
I don't understand why he filmed himself, 50 said, shaking his head about Diddy's obsession with recording everything. But I'm glad he did. That line landed hard, because those recordings carry weight that doesn't need Netflix approval or lawyers trimming edges. Footage like that doesn't need corporate permission, it just needs a platform, and 50 already has one. YouTube becomes the escape hatch, straight to the audience, no middlemen, no filters, just raw reality. Then he issued a warning, the people supporting him will be very quiet when more comes out. That's not light talk. One moment from his Sherry interview already showed why. He mentioned Diddy tends to date women who previously dated someone else, then dropped a bomb, claiming Diddy has a child with a woman who once dated Tupac. The room went silent. He was talking about Sarah Chapman, mother of Chance Combs, reportedly linked to Tupac back in 1995. He framed it as a pattern, pursuing exes of men who can't respond anymore, turning old rivalries into personal wins even after death. And he says there's more commentary like that buried in those 140 unseen hours. Netflix kept it clean, cutting anything too controversial. But YouTube, that platform won't hold back. One of the biggest omissions from the Netflix version was Kim Porter's death in 2018, mother of 3 of Diddy's children. She died at 47, sparking endless theories online, yet the documentary skipped it entirely, too sensitive, they claimed. Her kids rejected conspiracies publicly, and Netflix said they respected the family's wishes. Still, questions linger. Rumors about missing pieces of the story. 50 might be holding footage that digs into exactly those gaps. And then there's the explosive Kid Cudi car firebomb allegation from the 2025 trial, claiming Diddy ordered a hit after conflict involving Cassie. Media covered it heavily. The Netflix doc barely touched it. If that's in the vault too, YouTube's about to get very interesting.
Was about to make a very clear decision about which story it was going to protect.
That's a Blu Cantrell, but yeah, no, he was dating Blu.
Wow,
he had another woman that was pregnant that was about to come out with her pregnancy around the same time.
The islands?
Something like that.
Inside that courtroom, the details sounded chilling. Seats dusted in black ash, the scent of burnt wood still lingering. Testimony described the alleged firebombing vividly. A Molotov cocktail that nearly ignited but didn't fully catch, leaving charred traces and fragments forensic teams later examined piece by piece. But in the Netflix cut, that entire thread got toned down, brushed aside like it barely mattered, citing weak proof and legal concerns. Instead of digging into witness accounts, they played it safe, burying the most intense details.
Her bookings dried up. Her radio presence shrank. Her name started slipping out of conversations that it had previously dominated. By the time she tried to publicly confront what was happening, calling Beyoncé out in press interviews.
But 50 might not stay silent. He could release those testimonies himself, and since YouTube operates under completely different rules than major streaming platforms, nothing's really stopping him from dropping it raw. What's wild is the documentary never mentioned the long-running feud between him and Diddy, not once. Nearly 20 years of tension, shade, and public clashes erased like they never happened. That silence spoke loudly. It showed restraint from 50, choosing not to make it personal and instead keeping focus on the allegations tied to Diddy's world.
Are what make this story so much bigger than one artist's career trajectory. Jaguar Wright, who has spent years publicly naming what she calls strategic blackballing in the industry, has been explicit about Blu's situation. She said the erasure was
including their history would have made the film look biased, like revenge instead of reporting. Netflix wanted neutrality, corporate style. But YouTube, that's a different battlefield. No filters, no gatekeepers, no neutrality demands. That backstory actually explains a lot. It's the missing context behind why 50 chased this story for years. As he put it, for 2 decades he'd been uncomfortable with Diddy suggesting he'd take him shopping. That comment landed like thunder, hinting at tension and showing how deep the discomfort ran long before cameras ever rolled.
I've spent years studying that intentionality, started asking whether Blue Ivy was less of a color reference and more of an acknowledgement, buried, coded, deniable, of a woman whose existence the official narrative had worked very hard to make people forget. Then came Beyoncé's pregnancy. In 2011, Beyoncé...
The Tupac murder deep dive documentary brushed up against something massive. It included Keith D.'s alleged confession, a shocking moment, but barely scratched what's really there. Behind the scenes sit more witness testimonies that never aired, financial records tracing suspicious money trails, and hours of unseen footage hinting at alleged Diddy connections that could blow the case wide open. Netflix, of course, played cautious, wrapping everything in careful storytelling to avoid legal backlash. But those 140 untouched hours, that's where the real fire supposedly sits, material so risky no corporate platform would dare air it.
I've spent years studying that intentionality, started asking whether Blue Ivy was less of a color reference and more of an acknowledgement, buried, coded, deniable, of a woman whose existence the official narrative had worked very hard to make people forget. Then came Beyoncé's pregnancy. In 2011, Beyoncé appeared on an Australian talk show visibly pregnant, and during that interview, when she leaned forward, something happened with the fabric of her dress that viewers captured on video and could not explain. It looked, to a lot of people watching frame by frame, like a prosthetic stomach partially collapsing under the movement. The clip spread everywhere. Beyoncé's team dismissed it. The media largely moved on, but the questions it raised never fully closed. Because if Beyoncé used a surrogate, for whatever reason, medical, personal, practical, then the identity of that surrogate becomes the question underneath every other question. And when you layer that possibility on top of Blu Cantrell's documented disappearance, her rumored relationship with Jay-Z, the whispered stories about a pregnancy that surfaced and then vanished from industry circles, and the name of a child born in January 2012, the theory stops feeling like internet imagination and starts feeling like something someone worked very hard to make sure you'd never be able to prove. Jaguar Wright didn't leave it at implication. She named the pattern directly. She said Blue was erased. She said the name Blue Ivy was deliberate. She said the industry doesn't forget people by accident. It forgets them on purpose, and it does it so thoroughly that by the time anyone goes looking for the truth, the evidence has already been managed and the witnesses have already been warned. And then she said something else. She said Blue wasn't the only one. That's where this story opens into something larger than one woman's career. Because if you look at the landscape of R&B in the years surrounding Beyoncé's solo ascent, the number of talented women who hit unexpected walls, women who were on trajectory, who had label support, who had audience momentum, is difficult to explain through normal industry dynamics alone. Mia was a Grammy winner. She had major collaborations, mainstream visibility, and was one of the most versatile performers of her generation. As Beyoncé's solo career began to dominate, Mia's presence in mainstream spaces started contracting in ways that didn't match her output or her talent. She eventually spoke publicly about feeling pushed toward independent channels after industry politics turned against her, without ever specifying exactly whose politics she meant. Monica had a similar experience. An artist with genuine longevity and critical credibility who found her mainstream access narrowing at precisely the wrong moment. And then there's Aaliyah. Before Beyoncé stepped into the full spotlight, Aaliyah was the name most likely to define the next era of R&B. She was already transitioning into film. She had the sound, the image, the crossover appeal, and the cultural authority to make that transition permanent. In August 2001, just as Destiny's Child was entering its final phase and Beyoncé was being positioned for solo dominance, Aaliyah died in a plane crash in the Bahamas. She was 22 years old. And in the months that followed, the lane she had been building cleared in a way that benefited exactly one person. Nobody is accusing anyone of causing Aaliyah's death. That's not what this is. But the pattern of women disappearing from the exact spaces Beyoncé needed to own, through blacklisting, through personal destruction, through tragedy, through silence, is something that fans have been tracking for years without the mainstream conversation ever fully engaging with it. Because engaging with it means engaging with power. And the Carter machine is one of the most effectively constructed power structures in entertainment history. By 2004, Jay-Z was the president of Def Jam Records. Think about what that position actually meant. He wasn't just an artist with influence. He was an executive with institutional authority over which careers got resources and which ones didn't, over which artists got promoted and which ones got quietly shelved, over which contracts got renewed and which ones simply expired without explanation. Blu Cantrell's contract with Arista lapsed right around that period. And when she later spoke about what happened during those negotiations, the picture she painted was of someone who never had a fair fight. The lawyer she was advised to use, the one she trusted to protect her interests, was, according to her, secretly working for the label and Jay-Z's circle simultaneously. A conflict of interest so fundamental that it would have made any contract negotiation essentially rigged before it started. She said it plainly. That lawyer was working for them. They took what was mine. She lost her masters. She saw barely any royalties from music that had made other people significant money. And when she tried to push back, she found herself without support, without platform, and without the industry relationships that might have helped her fight. That's not bad luck. That's infrastructure working against someone. And the women who allegedly got too close to Jay-Z after Blu, the ones whose names surfaced in industry whispers as having similar stories, faced similar outcomes. Tierra Marie, once positioned as a rising star under the Rockefeller umbrella, experienced a dramatic fall from industry favor that insiders have linked through blind items and private conversations to Beyoncé's alleged awareness of her proximity to Jay-Z. The word allegedly went out. And the word, when it comes from the right place, doesn't need to be said twice. Then there's Kathy White, a name most people don't know, connected to Jay-Z through rumors that were circulating in certain industry circles before her death. Reports suggested she was planning to go public about her relationship. She died before she did. The case moved quickly. And the whispers that followed, about what she knew, about what she was going to say, are the kind that don't get reported on mainstream platforms because the power involved makes that conversation too expensive to have. These are not confirmed facts. They are the pieces that the public has access to. The documented associations, the reported timelines, the things women said on record before they went quiet. But when you line them up, they form a shape. And the shape has Blu Cantrell's silhouette in it. By 2014, Blu Cantrell had been out of the public eye for nearly a decade. No third album, no label, no press. She had announced a comeback in 2013, called herself a free agent, talked about new music. Nothing materialized. And then, in the early hours of a morning in Santa Monica, she was found running barefoot through the streets, screaming that someone was trying to poison her with gas. Police detained her. She was taken in for a psychological evaluation. And the media, which had mostly forgotten she existed, suddenly remembered her name, just long enough to attach it to the word unstable. The coverage was fast, and it was brutal. Cautionary tale, another singer gone mad, the kind of framing that takes whatever credibility someone has left and removes it so efficiently that anything they say afterward gets filtered through the lens of that moment first. It's a specific kind of reputational kill. Not a dramatic takedown, but a quiet burial under a headline that makes future journalists think twice before treating her as a credible source on anything. But here's what most of that coverage didn't engage with. Blu Cantrell herself, in interviews after the fact, said that what happened in Santa Monica wasn't just a mental health crisis. She said it was the end point of years of something she hadn't been able to talk about. She said the industry didn't fade her out. It erased her. And she said the erasure came with costs that went far beyond her career. She alleged that someone had been trying to poison her, that the gas she was screaming about wasn't paranoia. It was something she genuinely believed was happening to her in her home. These are claims that cannot be independently verified, but they are also claims that don't exist in a vacuum. Because the pattern of what happens to people who become inconvenient to powerful interests in Hollywood, the discrediting, the isolation, The sudden appearance of mental health narratives in the press is documented enough that treating every case as pure coincidence requires a deliberate choice to not see what's there. Think about who else this has happened to. Martin Lawrence, in 1996, was found wandering through Los Angeles traffic, waving his arms, yelling that people were trying to kill him. He was hospitalized. The story became the punchline to a career footnote. Years later, in different contexts, he described the industry pressures that had been building around him before that moment. The things he was seeing, the things he was being asked to do, the point at which he felt like he was losing the ability to control his own life inside the machine. Kanye West in 2016 went on stage and started naming names, Beyoncé, Jay-Z, powerful industry figures, in the middle of a concert. Within days, he was hospitalized. The narrative that followed emphasized his mental health almost exclusively, in a way that made it impossible for most mainstream coverage to engage with what he had actually said before the hospitalization. The content of his statements got buried under the story of the breakdown. Britney Spears, who we now know, through her own memoir and through the legal proceedings that dismantled her conservatorship, was a woman being controlled, surveilled, and systematically stripped of her autonomy by the people closest to her, while the media spent years treating her as simply unstable. The playbook is consistent, and Blu Cantrell's 2014 moment follows it precisely. A woman who had been speaking out, who had publicly challenged Jay-Z's circle, who had implied things in interviews that the right people would have found threatening, experiences a public breakdown that permanently shifts how the world receives anything she says going forward. Whether that breakdown was manufactured, triggered, or simply the natural result of years of genuine trauma and industry abuse doesn't change the outcome. The outcome is the same either way. Blu Cantrell stopped being someone the public took seriously, and the people who had the most to gain from that outcome were exactly the people she had been, carefully and incrementally moving toward exposing. Now here's what we don't know. We don't know definitively what happened between Blu Cantrell and Jay-Z. We don't know whether there was a pregnancy, whether Blue Ivy's name carries the meaning some fans believe it does, or whether the prosthetic stomach theory is rooted in anything real. These are questions that live in the space between documented fact and persistent public suspicion, a space that powerful people are very good at maintaining because uncertainty protects them better than denial ever could. What we do know is the documented record. We know Blu Cantrell's career collapsed at a specific moment, for reasons her label never adequately explained. We know Jay-Z's institutional power was at its peak during that exact window. We know she had spoken publicly about a relationship dynamic with him and Beyoncé that went beyond industry competition. We know her lawyer during contract negotiations was allegedly compromised. We know she lost her masters. We know she tried to come back and couldn't. We know she broke down publicly in a way that ensured the world would file her under crazy before they'd ever file her under credible. And we know that the name Blue Ivy Carter has never been fully explained in a way that closes the question of who it actually references. Jaguar Wright has been saying for years that the industry has a formula for this, that it identifies people who threaten the narrative, removes their access, isolates them from support structures, and then waits for the moment when the pressure produces something that can be used to discredit them permanently. She's been called bitter. She's been called unstable herself. But the people she's named, the patterns she's described, and the timeline she's mapped have held up with enough consistency that dismissing her entirely requires the same deliberate choice to not see that has always protected the people she's talking about. Blu Cantrell is still alive. She surfaces occasionally. An interview here, a social media post there. She hasn't fully told her story. And whether that's because she's chosen to move on, because she's been legally prevented from speaking, or because the cost of speaking is still too high to pay, that silence itself is a kind of answer. Because women who have nothing to fear don't stay this quiet for this long about this much. The music industry has always had a talent for making its casualties invisible. Not through violence, not always, but through the slower, quieter violence of removing access, dismantling credibility, and engineering the conditions under which a person becomes their own worst headline. Blu Cantrell was too talented to fade naturally. She was too outspoken to be allowed to stay. And the fact that her name is barely a footnote in conversations about that era of R&B, while the people she was connected to remain at the absolute apex of cultural power, is either the greatest coincidence in music history or the clearest evidence of how completely and deliberately a story can be buried when the right people decide it needs to disappear. So here's the question. Does the pattern you've just watched, the timing, the erasure, the breakdown, the name, the silence, read to you as a series of unrelated events in the life of one unlucky singer? Or does it read as something that was done to her? Something that required coordination, institutional power, and a willingness to destroy a woman's life and career to protect a narrative worth billions of dollars to the people controlling it? And what about Blu herself? Is there a version of this story where she finally tells it? Where she sits down, on her own terms, with her full voice, and fills in every gap that the industry spent 20 years making sure stayed empty? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't a cold case, it's an open one. And the more people ask the questions out loud, the harder it becomes for the answers to stay buried. If this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, hit that like button and subscribe, because Blu Cantrell's story is far from the only one that looks like this, and we're just getting started. I'll catch you on the next one.